last 10 years working with immigrants and refugees here in the Grand Rapids community. She has provided trauma counseling to unaccompanied minors detained by immigration at the U.S. border with Mexico. She has extensive humanitarian work throughout Latin America, in particular Central America, Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras. She's traveled extensively abroad. She's worked in group homes for children. She spent time traveling throughout Central America and Latin America. She's become familiar with U.S. foreign policy, with U.S. immigration policy. She's met with deported minors. She has dedicated herself to trying to make this a better place, a better world, a brighter world for all of us. She's the founder and director of the Center for Immigration Studies and Education and committed to creating a more informed and welcoming community in West Michigan for our immigrants. We also are pleased to have Rosa and Oteto. She came here to the United States as a Kenyan refugee when she was 11 years old, so she knows firsthand what it's like to be an immigrant. She attended school in West Michigan, and through her experiences, she learned the importance of advocacy for all minority groups. She holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Grand Valley State University. She speaks a number of languages. She has assisted with unaccompanied minors detained at the U.S. border in reunifying them with their families, both here and abroad. She is also a partner with Lindsay at the Center for Immigration Studies and Education. They will be speaking to us today about families torn apart in U.S. immigration in Latin America. Please join me in giving the two young ladies a warm welcome.
Hello, thank you very much. So my name's Lindsay, and real quick before I get started, I'm just kind of curious, are many of you in the Latin American Studies program? No? Nobody? Anyone like a Spanish major or minor? Oh, okay, cool. I did a Spanish minor here as well. How many of you have much of an understanding of the history of the U.S. and Guatemala? Has anyone studied that? Okay. Okay. Perfect. Well, that's great. That's why we're here. Normally this presentation is like at least 3 hours long. Never fear, I've cut it way down, but just a heads up, it's going to be like speed history class, speed current events class, a sprinkling of economics, and legal orientation to immigration. So I'm going to go kind of fast. If you have any burning questions though, like throw your hand up, I'll answer. We'll try and set some time at the end for questions, and Laura and I will stick around for a while afterwards. So the last time in November, I was in Tijuana, Mexico. I spent a week with a caravan of migrants that are coming out of Honduras there. And I was interviewed by some journalists that like really hardcore right-wing America First, pro-Trump journalists that were kind of down there harassing migrants. And they interviewed me, and I was talking a little bit about the history of the U.S. and Latin America, and they weren't liking the information they were getting, so they kind of cut that out and said, just like shoved the mic in my face and said, all right, what's the answer then? How do we fix this? I sort of just stared at the guy and I was like, you can't begin to fix the problem until you understand the problem. And you really can't understand the issue of immigration until you understand the history of the U.S. and Latin America. So really briefly, again, this is like a quick and dirty version of the history of the U.S. and Guatemala as an example. So Guatemala, way back in the day, were the Mayan civilization, great civilization. The people from the Mayan civilization dispersed out into the jungles of Guatemala, but they were established farming communities. They've been farming that land since approximately 3,500 BC. Then los conquistadores, the Spaniards show up, and there's like brutal repression of the Mayan people, murder, torture, enslavement, and this goes on for many years. Eventually, in about 1821, the Spaniards of Guatemala decide that they would like to be independent from Spain. So they get their independence from Spain in that year. But they continue on through generations with a series of pretty oppressive, brutal dictators. This is their dictator, Porvica, and he was a pretty bad dude. We're going to leave it at that because we don't have time to go into it, but I think most of you understand what a dictatorship looks like. So under one of these dictators in 1899, an American businessman who had been building railroads in Guatemala realized that the land the Mayans were farming, it was their own land, was very fertile, and that he could probably make a lot of money by growing fruit himself there and importing it to the U.S. So through a dirty deal made with one of the dictators, he managed to buy and became the single largest landowner of fertile farmable land in Guatemala. He bought it for a really low price considering what the land was actually worth, but he made that dictator a lot of money, and he got who that dictator is selling land that really didn't belong to him to sell. But he was able to acquire vast amounts of land in Guatemala, and he began something called the United Fruit Company. So time goes on, Guatemalans get tired of being repressed, and they decide to have a revolution. Ideas are going on around about democracy. They're looking at the U.S., freedom, equality. These ideas are gaining traction in Guatemala. So in 1944, they have a revolution and hold their first democratically, first fair and free elections. So they elect a guy named Arevalo, who was a teacher, and he begins doing social reform, building school, and thus begins what is referred to as the 10 years of spring in Guatemala. Life is getting a little better for people, there's less repression. So Arevalo was elected, he serves out his term, they have their second elections, a guy named Arbenz is elected. He was one of the revolutionaries. And he's looking at Guatemala and he says, we have a lot of resources, but we don't own our resources. And Guatemala is never going to be prosperous unless we own our own resources. So he comes up with this agrarian reform. And basically what he does is forcibly buy back the land from the United Fruit Company. He buys it back at the price that they had said it was worth in their taxes. They were underestimating the value of the land in their taxes, so they wouldn't have to pay on it. But he buys that land back to give back out to the Guatemalan people. Now, this makes the United Fruit Company pretty unhappy. So the United Fruit Company goes and lobbies with Washington. So at the time, this is under Eisenhower, and the head of the CIA and his brother were both lawyers for the United Fruit Company, shareholders. Basically all of the politicians except Eisenhower himself, but including down to his secretary, that were involved in this decision making were shareholders or somehow involved in the United Fruit Company. So they decide basically to come up with a plan to overthrow the democratically elected leader in Guatemala. They do this in a number of ways, but one of the main ways is through a PR campaign headed up by the CIA. So the CIA broadcast the radio channel out of Florida into a neighboring country and then directly into Guatemala. And they're just making up lies about Arbenz, he's a communist, who's not a communist, he's this, he's that, and making this negative PR campaign. And another thing to keep in mind, in any good dictatorship, there's a number of people that benefit from that dictatorship. So when social reforms are happening, there's always some people in the country that aren't happy about it because they're losing their grip and economic control on things. So they make up a coup, basically. They gather the people that are disgruntled, and they make up this coup, and they oust the democratically elected leader of Guatemala. And this includes military support, U.S. planes. We were heavily involved in ousting this democratically elected leader. And so they're successful. They pick our guns out of the country. They put their own guy into power. And they sell this to the American people as this is under, during the McCarthy years, so we're fighting, we had this win against communism in Guatemala. The guy they put in is an evangelical Christian. Yay, we're so happy, like, praise Jesus, everything's going to be so give all the land back to United Fruit Company, and the new president also happens to be a big-time racist, and he starts a 30-year genocide of the Guatemalan people. So there's a couple of pictures here. I took this when I was in the congressional building in Guatemala. I don't know if you can see it really well, but there's the story of the fruit companies and the Guatemalan people being beaten and oppressed and enslaved. And this is a Diego Rivera painting, and there's Eisenhower and the United Fruit Company making these dirty deals, and there's the bananas. So in 1954, we sponsored that coup, and this genocide starts with the indigenous people. This is a genocide to the tune of about 200,000 people murdered, 45 to 50,000 people disappeared. Besides indigenous people, it includes teachers, union leaders, anyone that is trying to call attention to what's happening. And it goes on with the continued knowledge of and support of the U.S. government and military for these 30 years, 30 plus. So there's mass graves all over Guatemala. They're still uncovering clandestine graves and identifying bodies. This is a picture I took of a disappeared man. If you go to Guatemala today, in Guatemala City, in different areas, you'll still find these old black and white pictures of people who disappeared during this time. The last time I was there, my guide was a Calvin grad, actually. He was originally from Guatemala, but he studied at Calvin, and he and his wife were from Calvin. They were down there showing us around. And we were looking at this massive wall of disappeared people on a building that was on a site where they're still excavating bodies and trying to identify them. And so it's a very solemn moment. We're looking at these pictures, and all of a sudden he walks up and points to one, and he says, "That's my dad." And when he was 6 months old, he's a Calvin grad from Grand Rapids, Michigan, originally from Guatemala. When he was 6 months old, his father was disappeared by the Guatemalan military with the support of the U.S. He's probably my age, in 30, so that many years ago. So all this happened, and people kind of knew what was happening, but there wasn't a lot of proof that the U.S., exactly how involved the U.S. was. So in 1999, the UN sponsored a historical clarification commission to investigate this issue. Documents were declassified from the federal government, and they released ultimately after the investigation, released a 9-volume report detailing the U.S.'s knowledge of and involvement in this genocide in Guatemala. So after that report was released, Bill Clinton apologized to Guatemala. There's no reparations or anything, but he said sorry. Also, on kind of a side note, in 2010, Hillary Clinton also apologized to Guatemala for a period of time when we sent doctors down to Guatemala under the guise of providing free health care. So Guatemalans would come to receive their free health care, and they would purposely infect them with STDs, gonorrhea and syphilis particularly, in order to study them. And it was horrendous. People died. I remember one story specifically where a woman had been infected. She was losing her eyesight due to this STD. She went back to the doctor. "Please help me. I'm in so much pain. I can't see anymore." And he reinfected her with more in her eyes to see how that would impact her, and then she died. So Hillary apologized for that too. Again, no reparations for that. You can't sue we have this convenient rule where you can't sue the government, and since it wasn't like a university sponsoring it, or it was the federal government, they can't sue a university. So all these doctors have their names up in plaques in universities, while these strains still exist and have been passed down from generations and are in families that were originally infected. So a while ago I was in a Starbucks, and I hear this guy saying all this racist crap about immigrants. So naturally, I get involved, and I start arguing with him, and we're like almost shouting at each other. I don't know how we didn't get kicked out. And you really, you just can't have this discussion without a shared base of information. So I tell him, I'm like, just stop. Let's talk about the history of the U.S. and Guatemala as an example. So we go over it, and he's like an old military guy, and he's quiet for a minute, and he looks at me and he says, "Well, fine. I guess Guatemalans can come then." And I was like, okay, well, I'll take that as progress, but I have news for you. This story is not all on its own. The story of the U.S. and Guatemala versions of it can basically be copied and pasted all over Latin America. This was not a Guatemalan isolated incident. The United Fruit Company, Coyumel was another one that eventually sold out United Fruit Company, Standard Fruit Company. They owned most of Latin America, and they did this all over the place. So, and to date, Guatemala has continued to have pretty repressive, corrupt, military-type dictatorships. So, that's history in Guatemala. We're going to jump to Honduras because that gets us into a little more current times. But the history of U.S. and Honduras it's similar. It's a little different. Basically, there was another fruit company that, when the Honduran government wasn't acquiescing to their wishes, instead of wasting all their time going to the U.S. government, lobbying, getting the CIA to help them, this guy, this American businessman, he just made his own private army and by himself threw the government over of Honduras. He got a mercenary from the U.S. and a former Honduran dictator, and they just took over. And Honduras has continued since, and pretty much right-wing military. They have like a faux democracy, but it's pretty much a right-wing military dictatorship by most standards. Then, in 2006, a guy named Mel Zelaya was elected. He was from the left, and he wasn't who you would expect to be a big-time reformer. He was from a pretty rich family. His dad had some human rights issues, some accusations against him. But when he took the presidency, he started doing major, significant anyway, social reforms. He gave electricity to poor people for free. He did a significant increase to the minimum wage, lunches for poor children in schools, poverty reduced during his time, crime reduced a little bit. He did a social security program for older people. He did a social security program for teachers. And he gained the support of teachers, labor unions, and peasant organizations. But he made enemies of the military and the elite. A lot of people in Honduras would say their country is run by about 10 rich families, and the military helps support that system. The military is pretty invested as well in business there. And the U.S. is invested in Honduras. We have approximately 150 different companies functioning there, and they function better from their point of view when there aren't labor unions or environmentalists or people making them take care of the environment, pay higher wages, take care of people. So it's convenient to U.S. businesses for these military dictatorships to continue to function. So Mel did this and made enemies of some pretty powerful people. Can this be moved down at all? Because I can't see the top. Well, I'll just have to read it to you. So towards the end of the title of this slide is called An Old-Fashioned Coup, and I took that from a New Yorker article that I appreciated because it kind of shows how it's just business as usual in Latin America. So at the end of his term, he's a few months from leaving the presidency, Mel decides to order some ballots to take what essentially was an opinion poll of the Honduran people to see if they have interest in amending the Constitution. Now, the constitutional amendment he was looking at is one regarding the presidency, where in Honduras they have one-term presidents. The Constitution was pretty much formulated by their military, and having a one-term president helps sustain power within the military and not allow the executive branch to get too much power. And labor unions and other groups have been calling for this amendment for a while. So he's not changing the Constitution. He's just taking an opinion poll to see if there's interest in having a conference and looking at the possibility of amending the Constitution. It wouldn't have affected him because it would have had it happen at the same place of the upcoming elections that he was not running in, okay? But this was the excuse that the military and the elite needed to take him out of power. So they have a military coup, and they show up in the middle of the night. He's in his pajamas in bed. He's on the phone. They, pick him up, arrest him, fly him out of the country. A lot of people think they would have killed him, but he was on the phone at the time and was able to say who was walking into his room when it happened. So they do that under the guise of he was trying to be a dictator. He was trying to amend the Constitution. He was trying to stay in power forever. That's not really true, but that was sort of the excuse that they needed. The United States, the whole world condemned this. All of Latin America, the UN, everyone condemned this as a right-wing military coup. The U.S. did also initially, but behind closed doors, Mel and other activists have said that the U.S. actually supported the coup. So So that's what I have down here. U.S. response, meh. Like, on the surface, you sort of said the right thing, but Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State at the time under Obama, and she's really defended, ultimately, what she sort of admitted was her support of this coup. So after the coup, there's major protests. This is a picture outside of the Brazilian embassy. So Mel's kicked out of the country, he sneaks back in, the Brazilian embassy houses him, there's protests across the country, people are killed during these protests, people are injured. They enact martial law, there's a 3 o'clock curfew. The whole country is like on lockdown so that people don't get out and protest and have a revolution ultimately. So that happened. Then they have more elections. The left-wing party at this point is sort of broken, they split. The right-wing party starts winning. They have one election, they have another election. A guy named Juan Orlando Hernandez is elected. He was president of the Congress during the time of the coup and very supportive of the coup, and one of these people saying, oh, Mel's a bad guy, he's trying to be a dictator. They had these vague accusations that Mel Zelaya was involved in the drug trade. No one ever came up with any evidence of that, but it sounded good on the news. So they would say those things. So Juan Orlando Ho, as they call him, was elected in 2014. So his term's coming to an end, and turns out he would really like to stay president. So he, instead of doing what Mel did, which was going to the people and see if they were interested in amending the Constitution, he just stacks the Supreme Court, has a vote of only 5 of the Supreme Court judges, and basically unilaterally changes the Constitution so that he can run again right then. Wait, what? Didn't he just help kick out the other guy that was sort of trying to take? Yeah. So that was a big hypocrisy. So they have these elections. So the left is, furious. They put forth their own candidate, Nasrallah. He's pretty popular, and they have their elections. And lo and behold, Juan Orlando's losing, and Nasrallah is winning. With 60% of the vote counted, Nasrallah is 5 points ahead. So what's the wannabe dictator to do? Well, he shuts down the elections. He shuts down the counting. The lights go out, basically. 36 hours go by. The lights come back on, and lo and behold, by some almost statistically impossible miracle, Juan Orlando is ahead. So major protests all across the country. The people are furious. But it doesn't really matter. I mean, a few months go by of controversy. The international monitors that are there are calling foul. They ultimately called for completely new elections and said that these elections were illegitimate. But Juan Orlando stays in power. So the long and short of it, Honduras has a new dictator who stole the elections and amended the Constitution so that he can be there. To top it off, if that wasn't enough irony for you, a few months ago in Miami, Florida, or in Florida, I think it was in Miami, Juan Orlando's brother, Tony Hernandez, who is also a congressman, who made major donations to his campaign, is arrested in the U.S. for importing multi-tons of cocaine into the U.S. This is his symbol on the cocaine that he uses. So remember a minute ago when I said they had all these random accusations towards Mel Zelaya without proof that he was involved in the drug trade, and this was kind of like an anti-Mel PR campaign? So this guy, of course, he had no idea his brother was a multimillionaire from the drug trade and a big cartel member. But, so Honduras has kind of a narco dictator. Current state of Honduras, it's held the highest murder rate in the world for a long time. They sometimes jockey positions with El Salvador. It's been cited as the most dangerous place to be an environmentalist or a labor unionist, a union leader. This is a picture, so that's Juan Orlando, that's Tony Hernandez, cocaine. This is a protest, Fuera Ho, that's the slogan, out with Juan Orlando, Fuera Ho. And as a friend of mine who's there, it was an activist there, told me, Al que diga Fuera Ho está muerto. The one that shouts out Juan Orlando is dead. There's been a pretty significant oppression of the opposition party and those that would like to have an actual democracy in Honduras. This is Berta Cáceres. She was a beloved environmentalist. At the time of this picture, she was fighting a dam, a company that was building a dam that was going to bring in that part of the river and the indigenous people in that area. She was murdered a few years ago by by the military. I was in Philadelphia during the Democratic National Convention when Hillary took the nomination, and it was shortly after her death. Her daughter was there actually speaking out against Hillary Clinton and Hillary's alleged support of the military and the coup in Honduras. But she still remembered that sign up there says Berta vive, Berta still lives. So that's what's happening in Honduras. Now I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and she's going to, that gives you a good idea of the history and some of the push factors. We didn't get too much in the war on drugs or poverty, but those are major problems in Latin America, as well as political oppression and sort of the impossibleness of the state of their governments. So Laura's going to explain to us about unaccompanied minors. Okay, sure.
Thanks, Lindsay. So Lindsay kind of went over the historical aspects of the subject. I'm going to go over kind of, like she explained, here and now and kind of what's been happening in the news. At our old agency, Lindsay and I work with children that are called unaccompanied minors. So unaccompanied minor is any child under the age of 18 that crosses through the southern border to the United States illegally. So they could be coming with their family member or guide alone. As long as they're not with a biological parent, they're considered an unaccompanied minor. So in 2018, over 50,000 unaccompanied minors crossed over from the southern border and were detained by Border Patrol. And the majority of them came from an area that's called the Northern Triangle. So that's El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. So when unaccompanied minors cross over from Mexico, they're just deported back immediately. And also, if they cross over with their, unaccompanied minors cross over with their family members, they're just deported back because they're not considered unaccompanied minors. So the general process for that is, once they come into the country, they have 72 hours with Border Patrol. They're then sent over to a program that's going to provide for their basic needs and identify an appropriate caretaker, a family member in the United States that eventually is going to help them go through the court process and help them fight their case. So where Lindsay and I worked, she worked as a therapist, I was a case manager. So they would come into care, they get the basics, food, clothing, shelter, they'd have contact with their families back in home country, contact with family members here, they get therapy, they'll get sort of like a little bit of legal presentation, just a summary of, to give them an idea of what their case is going to look like eventually. So the job for the program is to, like I said, identify an appropriate family or caretaker in the United States that's going to help them kind of be able to prepare for their legal case and eventually go and try and fight it. So once they're reunified with this family member, it's up to the family member just to make sure that they're taken care of and that